Coming up on today's show.
What research shows us is the more senses, the more of those tools you can put into what it is you want to learn, you'll lay down your learning better.
But what if someone is really strong and one and maybe weak in another? Is there any consideration in that?
Asking her maybe to draw pictures of her information that she has to learn doesn't really work for her. She responds to music.
How to get organized for a test or an exam, part 2 today on Keeping You Organized. Well, hello and welcome to Keeping You Organized. Today we're going to continue a discussion we started last time on how to cram. No, I mean how to get organized for a test or exam. Bringing back Leslie Josell, Order Out of Chaos, which you do help people make order out of chaos. I know that, and do a lot of work with students. But we were talking last time, Leslie, about tools to help people, students primarily with tests or exams. And I know there's more, so that's why we had to bring you back for this part 2. What other kinds of tools, huh?
There's always more.
There's always more, yes. So where do you want to start?
So here's what I want to start with. I think this would be fun. I want to start with 2 little things before we go into a bigger thing. I want to start with the one thing that most students do to think they're studying, which is actually the worst thing you could do. I think we have to address that. Right. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but we just have to talk about it. So if you ask most students, and John, I know you've got girls at home, ask them, most kids would say, I'm like, well, how do you study? Tell me how you study. 99% of a student will tell me what they do is they reread. I reread the textbook, I reread my notes. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely the worst thing you can do. Rereading is one of the most passive activities there is. There's no activeness to it. I don't even know if that's a word. Wrong, as I always say to kids, wrong answer. Right. You've got to get rid of that. Now, I'm not saying reading over things isn't the right thing to do, but it has to be done with something else. You have to, if you're reading, you need to be writing. If you're reading, you need to be speaking. Nice. Just reading does not take anything into account. Right. Because you're not reading for anything. You're not reading for comprehension. So that's the worst thing you could do. And the other thing that I do want to talk about is I actually hate the word studying. I hate the word review. I hate the word study. I think it's nebulous. I think it's vague. I think kids have like a visceral reaction to it.
I was going to say, most kids hate the word studying too.
I hate that word. So I actually don't use the word study when I work with kids. I actually like the word practice. Because you think about it, most kids get practicing. If they're on a sport team, if they play an instrument, if they're a theater kid, they all understand, they can visualize what it means to practice something. Yeah. They understand the concept of drills, they understand the concept of exercises, they understand going over things over and over again to learn it or to understand it better. And I think when kids hear the word practice, they see a beginning, middle, and end to the process. You don't see that with studying. Right. So I like to turn it on its head, and I very rarely use the word study. I tend to use the word practice. I also use the word move. I talk to my kids, meaning my student kids, and I always ask this question, and this is tell me how you're going to move the material differently. And that's what I mean when I ask, what's in your student's toolbox?
Right. You know what's really great? I think what's fantastic is that when I think about practice, usually you have a coach, right? Kind of like you, who is laying out the practice routine versus, studying, read, what do I have to do? Memorize the whole book from, the index through, and that doesn't give you the skills you need. So I love that concept.
And so I love the word practice too, because if you also know, someone is exactly what you just said. Someone is laying out for you the steps to take to get better. Yes. Maybe it's scales on the piano. Maybe it's exercises on the football field. Maybe it's, even voice exercises if you sing. But that's what studying should be. Remember we talked at the last episode, we talked about the vagueness
Yes.
of just studying. So when you go to practice something, it's defined for you. So that's what studying needs to be. It needs to be defined.
Yeah, and I was thinking even like for the subject of math, which is, you have to learn kind of the procedure of math as part of studying, not just how do I solve this problem, right?
So what I love about when I work with students, and I do this also in the tutorials, is everything has a system. Everything is either do this in 3 steps, do these 4 steps, because what I find is when a student has steps to follow and they don't have to do the heavy lifting. Remember last episode we talked about the brain, where your kid might be at 2 pounds, but what you're asking them to do is 10 pounds.
Yes.
But if you lay out a defined system for them to follow, then you're slowly exercising the brain from 2 pound to 3 pounds. Nice. You're not going 2 pound to 10 pound, which you're setting them up to fail.
Okay.
So student toolbox. So what do I mean by that? So we all learn using different, learning either different styles. Some people say different senses. And the 4 senses that I like to talk about are seeing it, saying it, hearing it, and doing it.
Yeah.
So think about it. The more you can bring in those 4 senses to anything you do, the more you're going to lay down learning.
Right. I think even in elementary schools, when they try to teach them songs, they give them motions. So they're saying it, they're reading the words, and then they're doing the motions. So I think that I know there's got to be research behind that, but I totally am on board with you on that.
It's all research based.
Yeah.
So my biggest joke for me is, and I say this to my students, is that when I was in college, okay, and I'm way, way out of college, I had to learn the Greek alphabet. And the only way I could memorize it was to put it to music. And I'm 50 years old and I can still sing it. And if you had asked me to say it, I couldn't, but because it's to music, I can still go alpha, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. I'm not going to do it for you, but you know what I mean? So there is definitely a study sense that I use to learn that. So what research shows us is the more senses, the more of those tools you can put into what it is you want to learn, you'll lay down your learning better, and you'll also then most likely do better on an exam. Okay, I'm going to have you hold there just for a second because we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you a question about those senses and how you can, if someone has a stronger one than another, how they do that. So hold that thought. We'll be right back in a moment with Leslie Josell talking about how to get organized for an exam or a test right here on Keeping You Organized, and we'll be right back.
Now there's a place just for you. Life can be busy, and you still have to keep it all together. That's why you like to be organized and in control. Introducing MyOrganized.life, a special place where you can get ideas and solutions to organize what's important to you, your important papers, your important decisions, your important life events. We show you the ideas and products to stay organized in your life. See what's new. Stop by and say hello. Visit us at any time at www.myorganized.life. It's just for you. MyOrganized.life by Smead. Find us at www.myorganized.life. MyOrganized.life.
We're back now on Keeping You Organized, talking about how to get organized for a test or an exam, really great studying skills. And we've got Leslie Josell, Order Out of Chaos. And Leslie, before the break, you introduced this toolbox, and we brought up the senses. And I know a lot of us have heard about that before. I'm a visual learner, I'm a auditory learner, all that, which kind of all makes sense. But you've laid out those 4 senses. But what if someone is really strong in one and maybe weak in another? Is there any consideration in that?
Sure. I mean, you have to do, so, we call it multimodal because you're putting different modalities into place here. But absolutely. So I'm going to give an example. I have a student who is she is a performer. She is my theater girl. You know what I mean? She is on that stage singing and dancing, and that is her thing. So asking her maybe to draw pictures of her information that she has to learn doesn't really work for her. She responds to music. She responds to movement. So for her, everything she has to learn, we make into song.
Oh.
Because she is a singer. So isn't that like the most perfect thing for her?
Right.
She, all her material now, and she remembers things much better and solidifies that information by singing it. The other thing she loves is watching videos, because she, if there's a topic that she's stumbling on, for her, learning it in a different way is by watching a video on that subject.
Right.
So for her, those tools work. But I have kids that would say to me, I would never in 1,000 years make up a song, Leslie. That is so not my learning style. My learning style is that I need to do it. I need to teach somebody.
Right.
So teaching somebody, because we find too that anytime you have to say it out loud, you really know if you know it.
Right.
Teaching, and I make every one of my students, this is like, they know this, that if they are studying for tests, I always tell them to pick something that they're having trouble on, and now they have to teach it to me.
Right.
And if I can understand it, then I know that they know it.
So how about the reader then? What kind of
okay,
in that modality?
So that might be a visual learner. So we talked about this, that reading doesn't have any place in your toolbox, just straight reading. But reading with taking notes does. So sometimes I say to a student, if you're reading your textbook, what I want you to do is actually turn your textbook into a study guide. So you're reading for a purpose. So what I have them do, and look, textbooks are amazing because textbooks take you on the journey. Remember, I don't know if you remember textbooks, but think about it. They have headers, they have subheaders, they have questions on the bottom. Can you relate something to this material? So if you put all those questions on a sheet of paper and now start reading to answer those questions, that's moving the material.
Yes. Great. Well, I think we need to talk a little bit about just overall planning, because we have a lot of tools here.
Yes.
How do we kind of wrap all this together in a plan?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not a big fancy girl. My world for a student is an 8.5 piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, with a mock calendar on it. But what I did there is I gave you the steps, figure out what you have to study. Seriously, figure it out and know exactly what it is. Then figure out what you know and what you don't know. Figure out what study tools you're going to use. Are you going to create flashcards? Are you going to watch videos? Are you going to be in a study group with friends? I love that one. And all of that needs to be put onto your calendar. So I always tell kids, if you have one exam, maybe start 3 days before. Again, it depends on how old you are, what else you have going on, but plan in that order. So your first day for me would be figuring out what you have to study and then figuring out what you know and what you don't.
Right.
The second day would be working solely on what you don't. Okay, what study tools are you going to use? The third day might be bringing in, a study group or a different type of, another tool. And then the last day is taking everything back together again and making sure you've gone over everything and then take the test. But if you've got multi-exams, I like bigger calendars. I like everything color-coded by subject so that you can see visually how much time you've allotted for each subject.
Right.
That's a really good tool. I see that a lot of kids will tend to favor one subject over the other. So I always want to prioritize what's your hardest subject versus not, and make sure that we're equally balanced. Make sure you cross out any days that you can't work. That's a really big thing. You've got to make sure that when you're planning that you're actually honest with your time. Do you have a party on Saturday? Are you going to grandma's for the weekend? Whatever it is.
Right.
But if you follow the steps that I gave you with figuring out, what it is you have to study, figuring out what you know and what you don't, what study tools are you going to use that are going to help you move the material so you learn it in a non-boring and fun way. And then the last, that's kind of the plan that you have to follow for anything you do.
Okay, I know you have like videos, right, on your website, and let's take a minute to tell people how they get a hold of you. But speak specifically to some of those videos that you have. I know that focus on studying and how people can get a hold of them.
Okay, so what we did is we took all of these topics because they can go so deep. You know what I'm saying? Just on their own, that we developed 30-minute tutorials. And what I do is I literally rip back the curtain and I go step by step on how I teach my one-on-one clients these specific tools. So we have one on just how to take notes, whether you're listening to a teacher in class or taking notes from a textbook. And there's real examples like textbook and how I show you how to do that. There's one on creating study guides, both for yourself that you do and using one that a teacher provides. There's one on flashcards, and I go over really fun, different ways to manipulate them. So it's not just the typical like, oh, look at a flashcard and put it down.
Right.
Many different ways to manipulate flashcards so that you're really understanding and comprehending material. Then one on how to take tests, multiple choice and true false. And then the last one is literally on the planning process of how do you plan for exams, whether you have one or multiple. They're
Awesome.
all 30 minutes and they all come with PDFs and handouts and support material, and they are awesome.
This is great because it's test taking time, you know. Yes. It's test taking time year round, but really.
But it's really test taking time.
Right. Well, Leslie, it's orderoochaos.com. And thank you so much for spending the time. I know personally my daughters are going to be all over those test tools because I hear that all the time. And you know, nobody wants to study, but now they're going to practice. They're going to practice for that test. That's right. Okay. Great. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. You should be able to take an exam and ace it by now. And if not, well, then you'll have to come back to another episode of Keeping You Organized.